I'm Helen. I'm Ms Sinclair.
And I'm Edison. Y'all better grab your extra large popcorn. We are in the thick of things with great films.
I am open and positive. I don't like it.
Let's throw on these boxing gloves.
Let's do it.
Let's fucking do it.
Welcome to Talk Movie to Me, a weekly podcast where we do a deep dive on a new release that's just hit theaters or streaming. I'm Ms Sinclair.
And I'm Edison. And yes, dear listeners, you're right to notice that it's just myself and Ms Sinclair on this week's episode. And that's because we kicked Helen off the podcast.
Yeah, bye. Bye, girl, bye.
No, fret not. She's just abandoned us for a tropical beach in Mexico, and I would like to just point out for the record that when I was in Mexico last November, I actually recorded our episode on David Fincher's The Killer while I was on that vacation. But it seems, dear listeners, that Helen's love for you just isn't as strong as mine.
I know. But,
Yeah.
you know, she will be back.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
No, we love you. We love you, Helen.
We love you, Helen. So, Sinclair, what do you say? Shall we kick on? Just the two of us.
Just the two of us.
We
Building
can make
castles
it
in
at the
the
top.
sky. Just
Yes.
the two of us.
You and I. Fitting.
Oh, I guess we apologize in advance, listeners. It's just Edison and I. We have no one to control us and rein us in.
Truly. Also,
know?
if I sound like I'm slurring, it's not because I'm drunk, although I have had some wine. It's because I bit the shit out of my tongue, and it's like swollen enormous, and so that's what's happening.
Okay. Yeah, well,
Okay.
you know what? We're doing fine without Helen. We're fine.
We're totally fine.
We're totally
Complete
fine.
shambles.
Yeah.
All right. On this week's episode, we have an absolute gem of a film to discuss. Picture this. A fantastical journey through a world where talking herons lead us to hidden towers, where magic and mystery intertwine with the trials of life. Yes, I'm talking about none other than The Boy and the Heron, a mesmerizing tale spun by the master storyteller himself, Hayao Miyazaki. Set against the backdrop of wartime Japan, we follow Mahito Maki, who, after his mother dies in a hospital fire, leaves the city with his father to move to the countryside home of his father's new bride, who awkwardly happens to be Mahito's mother's younger sister.
Mm-hmm.
Here, Mahito has to navigate loss, love, and the lure of the unknown. But this isn't just any coming-of-age story. No. This is Studio Ghibli's signature blend of whimsy and wisdom, where every frame feels like a brushstroke of magic on the canvas of our imagination. So let's unravel the layers of this enchanting narrative, where the hero's journey is never quite as straightforward as it may seem, and where the bonds of family transcend time and space. From hidden worlds beneath us to castles in the sky. Castles in the sky.
Just the two of us.
The Boy and the Heron takes us on a journey that feels very much in the style of Miyazaki, but as his final film, carves new paths for the director as well. So grab your popcorn, settle in, and let's embark on this cinematic adventure together, because here at Talk Movie to Me, every film is a portal to another world, and oh, what a joy to jump into the world of Miyazaki one last time.
Apparently.
Allegedly.
This man's said he's going to retire how many times now?
I mean, he's basically Cher.
Yeah. But I mean, I wouldn't mind if he made another one, for sure.
Of course. All right, Sinclair, what was your first impression of this film?
I actually was a little bit worried that I wasn't going to get to see this in the theater. But I did, and after seeing Princess Mononoke in the theater, I kind of vowed that I didn't want to watch these movies on anything other than the big screen. So it was very important that I did see it that way. This story starts pretty grim. Yeah. Right off the bat. Mahito has lost his mother. She dies in a hospital fire. He and his father, they move to a new home. And you do see how he is processing his grief when this film begins. He isn't super emotional about it. He seems a bit numb. Natsuko, who is going to be his new mother, he's not very receptive to her. He's very distant from her. even though she seems to be quite warm to him, he is not warming up to her at all. He's having some issues in school. And I really was just kind of buying into this journey right away. The movie looks so beautiful and so incredible, and I just felt like really immersed in this story right away, and I was eager to go on this journey with him. Even though it does start off pretty grim, I was still looking forward to where this was going.
Oh yeah, totally. Same. I saw this film, I feel like a couple of months back. I was also worried about not being able to see it in cinema. And so I had to see it as a double feature one afternoon. I literally took a half-day vacation day to go and do a double feature watching this film and American Fiction, which we were discussing with the podcast. And that was my only time that week that I was able to see it. Yeah, it was kind of really perfect. It was the cinema was basically empty. There was maybe 5 or 6 people there. It was a matinee, like on a weekday. And I was so cozy and comfortable and in the mood for this movie. When it opens, that scene, do you know what kind of reminded me of Guardians of the Galaxy's opening scene? Just in the sense that you see the sort of protagonist losing their mother, losing their parents, and it's the effect of that is that it immediately gives you compassion. It opens your heart to this character, and you're rooting for them, and you care for them, and you're invested in their journey. And so as sad as it is, it's also sort of a brilliant storytelling tactic, because we're right there with Mahito right off the bat, and also like the animation. That sequence of him running, sort of rushing through all the smoke and the people, and to get to the hospital, and his mother being like on fire and sort of turning into like a phoenix rising. It was truly breathtaking. So I was fully like enraptured at the beginning of this film as well.
I do think that the title, The Boy and the Heron, as a first impression, is a little bit misleading. It does make the movie sound like it's going to be something different than it is for some reason. Like a little bit
more of like an adventure tale.
And more whimsical.
Yeah.
Like there's going to be some like Heron that's quite whimsy. Maybe they have like a goofy relationship. And that's, not...
It's not the boy and the absolutely diabolical, terrifying Heron.
No. The trickster Heron. And it's interesting because after you saw this movie... You saw it first. I didn't know that much about it. And I remember asking you, well, the Heron's evil, right? And you couldn't really answer that question. And I thought that was interesting because you wouldn't really say anything about the Heron. I was like, yeah, but I hear he's not really what you think he's going to be. And you're like, which we'll get into more. But I do think like the title of this is quite misleading. It's not really what you think it's going to be.
Well, what was it originally called, Ms. Sinclair?
That's a great question. So this film was originally called How Do You Live? And that was a reference to a Japanese novel of the same name from 1937. And this was a book that was given to Miyazaki by his mother when he was a young boy. And in the film, you also see Mahito receiving a book from his mother as well. There's like a lot of autobiographical stuff in this.
And that book has the same name. It's also
so it's called How Do You Live? This isn't an adaptation of that book, though. It's just referencing it, and it's inspired by it. It's not a direct adaptation. But basically, the novel How Do You Live is about a 15-year-old boy who is dealing with spiritual growth. He's dealing with poverty and just the human experience in general. So this inspired that, but it's not an adaptation. So basically, the studio wanted to veer away from people thinking that this was this direct adaptation of that novel. And they decided to go with The Boy and the Heron.
Now, I will say, as a title, I actually think The Boy and the Heron is way stronger than How Do You Live? I understand that it might be a little misleading in terms of what it might make you think this film would be.
Yeah.
How Do You Live is a little bit more existential and philosophical just in its essence. But it's kind of a lame title, whereas The Boy and the Heron is actually evocative of some like story, and it's imaginative, and I can picture it as like a tattoo. I think it's a better title.
It's definitely, I think, more appealing and more like accessible as a title, and it draws your interest a little bit more for sure. So in terms of storytelling, you mentioned the hero's journey in the opening, which I also felt that this is definitely classical in its structure, and it does follow kind of a kid's hero journey, and there's a lot of comparison I found to so many different fantasy films.
Oh, cool.
This idea of a kid, you know, that has gone through something, maybe lost a parent, has had to move, and they for some reason have to enter this other world or a different realm, and it is this kid's version of a hero's journey. They come across creatures that are good and bad, you know, they show courage and honesty, and they ultimately come out of the journey having learned something and have changed as a person. Like this, I don't know about you, but this reminded me a lot of like Labyrinth and Alice in Wonderland and Chronicles of Narnia. There's like Wizard of Oz in this. And I love that type of story structure. I think that it's always appealing to me, and then a director and artist can just put their own spin on it. I don't know if you felt like that when you were watching it. But
I totally did. And it is something that he has also, you know, utilized in so many of his films in the past. This story of like a young child who is faced with some tragedy or some trial and has the sort of chutzpah to push through it and learn about everything.
Yeah.
And grow. And I mean, we've seen that in several of his films.
I feel like Spirited Away is the one that I thought felt the most close to this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that makes sense for sure.
Yeah, I did like how he comes across this heron, and it's almost like this guide in a way, but you don't necessarily know what the heron is trying to tell him right away. You just know that there's a connection between the two. I did look up the symbolism of the heron.
Okay, here we go. Yeah.
So in Japanese culture, the heron is mysterious. They're tied to spirits, gods, and death, and they are also a link to the underworld.
Oh, well, that's pretty much proves exactly true here in this film.
Yes. So you do feel like Mahito is about to embark on this spiritual journey. The thing about this heron, though, is he has a trickster quality to him.
Yeah, but I think that that's really interesting. And it's because I think we're dealing with really complex emotions in this film. People who are watching this movie, you know, I think it has been really critically acclaimed. It obviously just won the Oscar for Best Animated Film. I really want to see this movie a second time. I don't know what a kid would get from this film other than it just being visually stimulating. Like, this is very complex storytelling. Even the narrative itself, the plot is super kind of confusing and opaque at times. It's non-linear. I think that that's because what he's trying to tackle are these really, really deep themes, like very specifically about Mahito's grief and loss and trying to come to terms with that. And I think having this guide, right, to the underworld, kind of leading him along there, like this heron. But emotions are tricky. Emotions are tricky, and you just don't know. You got to find that path yourself. But I do think that this theme of like grief, that is, to me, what this film is about. And it reflects Miyazaki's personal relationship too with his mother. She had tuberculosis when he was young and was bedridden for years, and they were at odds, and he missed that relationship. And we see that the relationship between Mahito and his mother is obviously the central catalyst for the story of this film too. But her loss is in this movie is the inciting incident in that hospital fire, but it also shapes his whole emotional journey throughout the movie. And there's this void of that. And it's driving his desire to find her, to try and bring her back. It's the complexities of grief, the struggle to come to terms with loss. And the Heron, and then Birdman, as once the Heron's sort of costume comes off, I feel like he's like manifestation of grief.
Yeah.
Because he's not really... That's why when you ask me, is he a villain? I'm like, the character is way more complex than that. He's like, he's all of the things. And that's why I see him less like this sort of actual character and more just a manifestation of Mahito's own grief, because it is going to be all of the things.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's strange, too, that he is part man. Like, I was actually kind of surprised that he turns into this like little creepy little man.
I know.
I was like, "Oh, go back to the Heron. I don't want to see this little creep."
I agree. It was like so uncomfortable. He was so grotesque.
He actually reminded me a little bit of Hoggle from Labyrinth, because I find in these stories these characters come across an ally or a guide like right away. Mm-hmm. When they're about to go on this journey. Like even in Chronicles of Narnia, they come across, Tumless. Mm-hmm. He reminded me of little creepy Hoggle from Labyrinth. But I think that it is interesting that the Heron is a shapeshifter, because that kind of suggests this idea of, well, first of all, a trickster, but second of all, the idea of like transformation too. And that he's going on this journey and it will transform him in some way. When he goes into the tower, I have to say, too, that I loved the way this looked.
Oh, my God.
That tower.
So cool. Like, can you imagine, please?
I would go in.
Can you imagine? So would I. Absolutely. I would be terrified. I would be mostly of spiders, but I would 1,000% go in, because what could lie beyond that wall but adventure? Like, it could be nothing else but that.
Well, or the gates of hell. That is the thing. Like, or the underworld. So
I would never think Gates of Hell or Underworld. I would maybe think like Minotaur are gonna kill me or something, but like Gates of Hell, Sinclair, you're so dark.
No, okay, so here's the thing. Okay, so first of all, he goes to this tower, and entering in it, it looks like a library. Like somebody has been studying. Like there's these walls of books, and it's all decaying and run down. It looks like, also like an old Hollywood mansion, and very like cavernous. And so above the doorway in, there is a saying that translated is "divine power created me." And this is a line from Dante's Inferno, and it's above the gateway to hell.
Okay, well, wow. So
it's not just me being dark and macabre. However, you don't really need to take that as a gateway to hell. I actually didn't think that he entered hell.
Well, no, because it's about journey. Dante entered hell, but then went through purgatory and then got to Paradiso.
Yes.
So it's like it's about the transformation of the journey.
Yes. And it also doesn't even necessarily feel like it's like an underworld.
It is a literal underworld, and that they fall down, and you have these little these little like floaty things that were such a callback to Princess Mononoke and the Kodama, the like tree spirits.
Yeah.
But that float up and become souls again. So yes, it is the underworld, but it didn't feel hellish in any capacity. No. It was like beautiful water and like gorgeous green fields, and like it was breathtaking.
It also just feels like he's in a place that is outside of a time, outside of time, that has its own rules. The fun part of it is that it's like, okay, well, this could be another realm. This could be another timeline. This could be a different world that has a completely different architect, which it does.
So this is Miyazaki entering the MCU.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
The Miyazaki verse.
Yeah.
You meet characters that he has met in his current life, but they are younger versions of themselves.
Like his mother. And I love that he was able to clock the older lady, like the old maid. And just also, again, with the visuals, like,
Yeah.
how do you have these 7 old maids in, back in the real world that all are so spectacular looking and so different, like, from one another. They were really hilarious characters. But yeah, the one of them goes into this tower too, and he sees her down there too.
Yeah, but she is this younger version of herself, and almost, like mightier version of herself as well. I wanted to touch on the cosmic element of this film. I loved this film so much because it touches on so many cosmic themes. The idea of creation and mysticism and timelines and creating a utopia and having an architect create different worlds. And I really liked that. I find that I love the nature elements of his films, but I deeply connect to the questions that this film was asking. And I think a lot of it has to do with the cosmic stuff that I find really fascinating. This was actually way more cosmic than I was expecting, and that's why I think it is hard, I think, for a kid to be able to.
What are they going to get from it in that way?
Yeah, this is difficult stuff for sure.
It is. It's complex, and I really appreciate that about this film. There was exactly zero promotion for this film. He didn't want there to be any promotion for this movie, and so we really didn't know anything about it in advance of going to see it, except that it was his last film. And because we know that he's had such a strong focus on like environmentalism in his films, which I'll discuss in a minute, but I kind of thought that the film might be more leaning that way. And it's present, but it definitely agree with you, the sort of cosmic discussion here about what is the purpose of creation, and what is the responsibilities of a creator, and what happens when a creator's like time is done, was definitely the larger focus, and so cool. But these are big thoughts.
And also, this is, him coming to the end of his life and also his retirement as well. And we see in this film the grand uncle wanting to pass on his world, basically, to Mojito.
But does Miyazaki have a mojito?
He basically made this film apparently for his grandson. It kind of was meant for his grandson. Not that his grandson is going to, take over the, his like film legacy or anything. But I think it's this idea of like what you're leaving behind for people. And also this idea that you can make something, especially film, that just lives on forever. Film is pretty timeless as well. And the idea of like, what is going to be your last film? What do you want your last film to be? I mean, he might just keep coming out of retirement because he's like, no, it's not that one. It has to be this one.
Maybe.
It's like, oh no, I can do this. I want this to be my last one.
Like, I hope so. So. But I do think that this is a strong one because it is so personal, and learning a little bit more about his own life. You can see the mirrors in the story of Mojito in this film, and in this sort of cosmic element here, the creator element of the film, or this theme. I do want to just touch on the environmentalism bit. Environmentalism isn't the like central focus of this film in the way that it is in, say, Princess Mononoke. That is a prevalent theme throughout all of his filmography. There's always environmental messages in these stories, addressing topics of like the human activity on nature, the importance of preserving ecosystems, the interconnectedness of all living beings. And some of those themes we do see here, right? The depiction of nature, right? All of his films have these lush, detailed landscapes that highlight the beauty and wonder of the natural world. And that is so prevalent here, even whether it's like the man-eating ridiculous dumb parakeets or the fields and the heron. It's just so beautiful. And also the sort of connections between living beings that's something, the interconnectedness is like a theme through all of his films too, where we have these spirits, these forest spirits, or these human spirits, or tree spirits, or whatever. We see that in this film too.
Yeah. I think it's the idea of trying to build a perfect world too, and being disappointed by your own creation. You know, I think that the grand uncle is trying to create this utopia, but unfortunately, with good comes the bad, and you don't really have control over what you create. You only do to a certain extent. And the parakeets were definitely representative of us, human beings.
Yeah.
They seem to be the most like ravenous on everything, and using up all the resources, and kind of following this like groupthink mentality, and following this kind of like fascist leader. And there's that moment with, is it a crane that he's dying? The cranes that are eating the...
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And, you know, the cranes are eating these little spirits that are supposed to go up.
Yeah.
And basically the dying crane, voiced by Willem Dafoe.
Okay, well, we need to talk about that, too.
Which we'll get to. But this dying Willem Dafoe is like, you know... basically, I don't want to do this. We were put here. We don't have anything to eat, and now we have to survive. You know, we've been disrupted. Now we have to go eat these things that we don't want to eat, but we have to eat them to survive.
Well, and that is so fascinating, too, because I think that draws a
pelican. I think he was a pelican.
Pelican, yeah.
Yeah.
It was a pelican,
Pelican, yeah.
To his sort of criticism of war. And... you know, that just sounds like marching orders, right?
Yeah.
It just sounds like we had this conversation in the Zone of Interest episode.
Yeah.
Like, it's very that. And war has been a prevalent theme throughout his films. It was in this one as well, right? This is set during the war, the Second World War. We saw it in Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, Castle in the Sky, Princess Mononoke as well, even Howl's Moving Castle. Like, war is depicted as this destructive force that brings suffering and division. But within it, there's like this hope, this resilience, a possibility of reconciliation. But doesn't come without working for it and without learning for it. It's not easy, and it could turn at any moment. And that's interesting, because the parakeets are that. This story is that crane is the pelican is expressing that.
Yeah. And I think that the grand uncle, he's so frustrated at the end of the film. He's like, oh, like this world, and like, can you make it better? And basically Mojito says, I can't take this over for you, because I myself have malice. I myself am not a perfect
pure
human being. I'm not pure. Nobody is. You can't have a utopia. This is going to happen over and over again. You know, it's this idea of like, do you throw this world aside and just start again? Like, how many times has our world started over again? You know? We don't know.
We don't know. It depends how much of a believer you are, I guess. But.
Yeah, so basically the grand uncle is like, do you want to take this world, this responsibility? And Mojito is, you know, in that Willy Wonka moment, passing off the chocolate factory to Charlie. Mojito is like, nah, I'm good. I have to go home to my life and learn to love those in my life, and learn to make myself better in my current life before I can think about taking on this responsibility of the world, essentially.
Isn't that so
you got to start at
fascinating?
home, you know?
Do you know, when you're saying that right now, I hadn't thought of that until this very moment, but doesn't that also kind of feel like a retirement thing? It's like, what if you've spent your whole life as a creator doing this thing, building these worlds and these worlds and these worlds, and living in this other world, but actually you are alive in the real world, and you need to put your focus there.
Yeah, you need to spend your last time with the ones you love, and like focusing on who that is.
Interesting.
Yeah. Can I just say one of my favorite parts in the story before we move on to performances?
Absolutely, yeah.
he spends time with the younger version of his mother. And you hear the story of how when she was a child, she disappeared for a while. And when she came back, she was like the happiest anybody had ever seen her. And you realize that she goes back and she's the happiest she ever has been because she spent time in that other world with her son. And that like breaks my heart. And that didn't hit me until later.
Yes.
That's why she's so happy when she's a kid and she comes back because she met her son older in that world.
Oh, no.
And
that didn't hit me until right now.
It took me a little bit and I was like, oh my God, that is like beautiful and devastating. And he's like, don't go back to your timeline because you die in that timeline. And she's like, that's what I have to do. Like, that is the course of my life.
Right.
You know? But she goes back happy, even though, like, you know, that's going to be her future. She still had that time with her son.
I love that. This film is incredibly dense. I can't wait to see it again. But I want to touch on, okay, so I saw this at the theater. I saw it with subtitles.
Yeah.
It was in original Japanese with subtitles. And you saw it dubbed in theaters.
I did, because it was the only screening I could go to. It was just dubbed. Like, I didn't have another option. There wasn't like, go to this one, it's subbed, go to this one, it's dubbed. The theater I went to, it was just dubbed. Yeah.
So I find that's fascinating. I'm so curious to know, because there were a lot of, like, everybody from Florence Pugh to Willem Dafoe to Robert Pattinson, like, we're all in this. Those are big names. What was that like?
Well, I hadn't looked up anybody who was voicing this beforehand. And honestly, I generally like going to seeing a movie with the subtitles, but I found that this didn't dampen my experience at all watching this. For the most part, I didn't find the celebrity voices distracting. I actually couldn't tell for the most part until it got to Pelican Willem Dafoe.
Okay.
And then I was like, that is definitely Willem Dafoe. And then there was a moment where there was Parakeet Batista. And I was like, that is 100% Batista.
Parakeet Batista.
Yes, he's like King Parakeet or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, he's the king. Okay.
Yes.
Well, I heard one clip online of Robert Pattinson as the Heron.
Insane.
Entirely unrecognizable. I would not guess that was. I would.
It
never
didn't
be able
even
to
need to
place that
be
as his
him
voice.
at all. He did such a good job. Like, it didn't even matter who it was. It's not anything that you would go, oh, hey, that's Robert Pattinson. I saw his name in the credit, and it was like the Heron. I was like, what? He's the Heron?
Really, really good.
It sounded like Willem Dafoe, but not. Such a great performance.
That is always my worry whenever if I were to ever see one of these films with like Hollywood stars, is that it would pull me out of that world because I would recognize their voice. But then hearing that clip, it was like, entirely unrecognizable. You
can't come in full-blown celebrity to do a Miyazaki film. You can't do it. Like, you have to like
Aquafina. It's just giving us that voice.
Yeah. It's like, not about the celebrity with those. It's about really being like, hey, I'm a part of this. I have to like serve the movie, and I can't distract from all the themes that are going on in this movie. I cannot take away from that.
Yeah, and especially the thought that it's Miyazaki's last film. Like, come on.
Yeah. Well, how was the subbed version?
I mean, it was fantastic. It was I found all of it. It's the natural, language of what's happening. So it felt like it matched the tone of the film perfectly. Yeah.
So just a little bit on technical. This is apparently the most expensive Japanese movie ever made. Wow. It's kind of taken that top spot. So the animation, like the scale of the animation in this film, the detail, the time put into it, it's become the most expensive Japanese movie.
I mean, it is utterly breathtaking.
Yeah.
And it's a really unique, like, style where you have these, it's like the most ornate, gorgeous paintings as a sort of backdrop. And then the design, the hand-drawn sort of moving designs that are a little less detailed in front. Right?
Yeah. And how it fits with the sound too. Like you hear the water, you hear the wind, you hear the leaves, and you actually really see and feel the nature in these films.
Yeah, the elements, I mean, that's another way that he sort of incorporated the environmentalism or natural bit into this, right? We see that a lot. We even see in the scene when the heron leads him to the sort of replica of his mother and he touches it and she turns into water, or when he's in the other world and then he sees his young mother, but she's like just the face in this fire, and the heron and its wind, and it's absolutely that. Also, in terms of sound, the score, composer Joe Hisaishi, he is the mastermind behind the score of all of the films that Hayao Miyazaki has directed at Studio Ghibli. And I thought this was a really beautiful score. It's quite minimalistic, actually. There's that main theme, and it's called Ask Me Why, and it pops up 3 different times in the film, and it's gorgeous and emotional and evocative, but it's also largely just a piano with a kind of a subtle string in the background.
Yeah.
And a lot of this was about paring it down, and he said in one interview that he really wanted to put this like sound, the score, the first time you meet the heron. And Miyazaki was like, no, I don't want that at all. It feels overblown. It's too much. And so he started with he did it anyway, and they've been working together and collaborating forever. So he did it anyway, and he put this big thing there. And Miyazaki was like, no. And so he kept removing elements until finally it was just a single note.
Yeah.
So then the heron arrives and it's like, or whatever the note is. And that became the sort of representation of that, and it works. It's perfect, but it's minimal but beautiful.
Yeah, incredible. So this did win the Oscar this year. I was very happy to see that. I think it's very deserving.
Yeah.
He was not there to get his Oscar. He did not attend.
Right.
So he hasn't attended before, actually. He kind of has a history of this. He has kind of a tense relationship with America and with the Oscars. Basically, when Spirited Away won, he didn't attend the ceremony because he was protesting against the Iraq War, and America was bombing Iraq, and he didn't want to attend as an act of protest. And so a lot of people were like, is he doing that again this year to protest the Oscars again? But a lot of people have said it's just old age. He's just old.
Okay, fair. I did want to fly from
Yeah,
Japan. Okay,
yeah.
that's fair.
He was asked about the original title of this film, How Do You Live? Someone actually asked him, well, how do you live? And he responded with, I'm making this movie because I do not have the answer. So it's one of those things where he puts all this questioning and all this angst and everything he's feeling into his art. But he doesn't ultimately have an answer. So he's probably going to just, spend some time now in retired life and come to terms with maybe things that he didn't while he was making movies.
I mean, it's very giving Joni Mitchell, that quote. This man is 83 years old, and he's basically saying, like, both sides now.
Yeah.
I really don't know life at all. And I kind of love that. These are two people that we really look up to culturally as wisdom speakers.
I know, and they're just like, you know what? I don't actually know.
Yeah, and I like that.
We will
I think
never
that's
know.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I think it's safe to say that you and I both really, really loved this, and it's a beautiful film, and we've definitely gushed over it. So maybe for last word, we'll talk about where this sits on our Miyazaki rankings. Like, where does this sit? Does this make your top 3, you think?
I think this makes my top 3, as in third. Princess Mononoke will always be my favorite.
Yeah.
I just love it. And then I think Spirited Away is his masterpiece, and that would be number 2 for me. And I would, it's tough because, you know, I kind of fancy Howl, but
Same.
and I do love that movie so much, Howl's Moving Castle. But I think this has just got a little bit more to it, a little more meat and complex themes. And so I'll put this as 3rd, and with Howl's Moving Castle as a very close 4th.
Right.
What about you?
You know, I think that Princess Mononoke has always been my favorite. I think it is still my number 1, but I was way more deeply affected by this one, and this one lingered with me. For days after watching it. I was still picking up on the existential questions of this. I just feel like this hit me a lot deeper. But I guess I would go Princess Mononoke. Then I would go Boy and the Heron, I think, as number 2. And then Spirited Away, number 3. Also Howl's very close, coming in at number 4. But you know, that is my animated boyfriend, Howl, for sure.
Yeah.
We both think he's very hot.
No, mine too.
Well, you know what, Edison? This has been lovely.
It has been lovely. Helen, you know, enjoy your time in Mexico. Just stay there, honey.
And you know what? She won't mind because Helen doesn't
she
doesn't love animated films. That's the truth of it. I think she would admit that on the podcast.
She would. Yeah.
Oh my God.
She's absolutely not listening.
And
to
we
this
don't
episode.
actually have her here to do the outro.
Oh, I don't know what to say. Okay, listen. And subscribe.
So what we're going to do is we're actually just going to cut in her doing the outro from another episode, everyone. So just enjoy that.
All right, well, this has been another episode of Talk Movie to Me. If you'd like to get in touch with us, our email is talkmovietome@gmail.com. Follow us on Instagram at talkmovietome. Rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And season 7 episodes are on YouTube at Talk Movie to Me Podcast. I'm Helen.
I'm Ms. Sinclair.
And I'm Edison. Thanks.